Welcome, everybody. I'm John Stewart. I'm EVP of Customer Success and Analytics at Upwave, and Upwave is the analytics platform for brand advertising. Today's expert update, we're going to be talking about putting a performance lens on your brand investment. So with Q4 officially here, it means it's time to make sure your brand advertising dollars are counting. If you're on this call, hopefully you already believe in the power of branding, but you might be surprised to learn that some of these campaigns are just not as easy as set and forget. So today, we're going to take a deep dive into why campaigns might underperform, how to use tactics to optimize your campaigns so your brand KPIs are then maximized, and in general, kind of some of the bigger levers that you can pull. So as we go along, if you have any questions, feel free to put them into the Zoom chat and we'll try to answer them when we can. So let's get going. So by the end of this little talk that we're going to have here, you're all going to be experts in performance branding. But before we can do that, we have to settle an age-old debate: which is better, performance marketing or brand building? No, we're not going to take on that today. We love both. We know that. But you know what we also love? Autumn. And we love autumn's traditional activities like apple picking, or said another way, there's a lot of demand right now for apple picking. So if I have an orchard, I'm capturing that demand by having a mature apple with lots of ripe, juicy apples, apple tree with lots of juicy apples. And what that means is I'm a performance marketer. I'm capturing that demand. But I didn't just plant the tree and wait for that ripe fruit to appear. I had to plant the seed and generate future demand by growing this tree over time. So I was brand building effectively. So if I'd put in all of my work before planting the tree and just chosen the most robust type of seed, prepped the soil, picked the right time of year, then just waited and hoped that the environment was conducive, then that's what I would call passive branding. But what made me a performance brand builder is that I had a feedback loop and took action along the way, observing growth patterns, looking for disease, monitoring the color of the tree, and then adjusting my care along the way with water levels, soil amendment, weed and rodent control, et cetera, et cetera. So I promise this is last of the apple reference, but hopefully this simple example is a way to help you understand that you can't just sit and wait. I can't tell you how many times I've seen brands or publishers tell me that they want brand lift, but then they sit and don't do anything with all the data telling them exactly how to make their campaigns better. So kind of think about how ridiculous that is. You'd never plant a tree and then just assume that you had the perfect conditions. Well, why would you launch a campaign and assume that you could optimize to clicks and conversions, and then you get awareness and consideration? Honestly, your programmatic mobile banner with a frequency of 1.5 isn't going to cut it. As they say, mess around and find out. But I'm not picking on programmatic. DSPs actually have a pretty unique opportunity to ingest brand signals and have some of the biggest levers. But now that we've been through this, all of this example, and you sort of got your feet wet with performance branding, I know that none of us are going to make that mistake. We will all be performance brand marketers. So the question is that we're going to solve or sort of get to today to generate some ideas is what we're going to talk about. So how do we do it? As a reminder, this is in Upwave's DNA. So in order to provide level of detail sufficient enough to optimize your tactics in a campaign, what you need are deterministic signals of exposure, respondents at scale, sophisticated models that isolate the impact that is caused by the advertising, You need control groups specific for every single tactic measured. And you need the computing horsepower to calculate all of this in the cloud every night so that you can build in-flight monitoring tools and diagnostics that goes beyond brand lift charts. So our access to all this proprietary data is what allows us to look at the brand impact. And we recently wrote a couple of reports to put a performance lens on things. So we're not going to discuss the reports today, but we're going to use that data. And I'd like to introduce Bo Dabbs, who's our chief data scientist, to help us answer some of those hard questions today. So Bo, how are you?
Doing good. Excited to be here, John.
Awesome. So before we dive in, can you help us understand what you've been doing or what data you've been digging into?
Yeah. So first, I wanted to talk a little bit about what we're doing in terms of methodology for these research projects. To do that, I wanted to talk a little bit about what we're doing when we're measuring lift, specifically brand lift. What we're really doing is trying to understand the causal impact of the ads served during the campaign on the opinions of consumers. So unless you have set up a randomized controlled trial, it's really important to understand the relationship between demographic and behavioral factors and brand outcomes. You don't have a good understanding of these relationships, you're likely to end up measuring something like pre-existing differences between the consumers in your target audience and those outside of your target audience instead. So in practice, given the complexity of targeting of ads on the internet, you really need complex machine learning models to learn these relationships. So all of the data we're going to be sharing today is based on over 1,000 brand campaigns and what we were able to learn from both the brand lift results themselves as well as the models we built to understand those relationships between brand campaigns and consumer opinions.
Awesome. Yeah. And I think we know everyone loves to see their campaign performing well, at least nobody more than us. But understanding what is working versus what is not working, I think, is at the core when we talk about actionable insights. So we wanted to start with probably the hardest question we could ask, which is why would brand advertising fail to make an impact? So Bo, how did we do this? What did we look at?
Yeah, so we really wanted to dig into what campaign elements were providing the best opportunities to improve the performance of failing campaigns. So for this data analysis project, we actually only looked at campaigns that were showing negative lift at the overall level. So what this really means is that at best, these campaigns were seeing flat performance. So for each campaign, we then looked at what campaign elements had optimization opportunities, meaning which elements had large differences between the best and worst tactics within that element. And the first thing we found here is that there were lots of potential culprits, and they weren't always the ones you would expect. The elements most likely to have an opportunity for increasing the impact of the campaign were publisher, ad size, creative, and frequency. And each of these elements had optimization opportunities for more than 30% of campaigns. But I really think the main takeaway from this data point, while there are some trends in what is likely to be causing decreased performance, it's not always going to be the same element for every campaign.
Awesome. So I guess just to kind of make this clear, when we say optimization likelihood, we mean maybe something that is most likely to drag the campaign down. Like, for example, an ad size that's not doing well, or potentially a publisher. Is that right?
Yeah, so we're going to be talking about elements that are showing up very frequently, campaign in and campaign out, as having changes that can improve the performance of your campaign.
Got it. Okay. Well, so so I think a lot of folks might see this and potentially are tempted to think they could just cut the underperforming publishers, right? But we work with a lot of smart publishers, and what they do is they use the analytic tools to make them able to course correct. So they just need to kind of know the information and use it to figure out what they're aiming at. So now that we know what's most likely to drag a campaign down, are these the same things that are most likely to have a large positive impact?
So not necessarily. So to dive into this, we also looked at which elements had the largest optimization opportunities on average. So the largest potential impacts were found for audience, frequency, ad size, and creative. And I think the really interesting one here is audience. So audience wasn't the most common element for improving campaign performance. It was a couple of steps below the elements on the previous slide, but they provided some of the largest opportunities to improve lift when there was an opportunity. So if you compare audiences to publishers, publishers were 50% more likely to have an opportunity for optimization, but the potential impact of optimizing audiences was 50% larger. So really, some elements show up a lot, but don't have huge impacts, but other ones show up infrequently, but have much larger impacts.
Interesting. And so, okay, so we're kind of making a distinction here between things that could drag a campaign down, which maybe you could interpret as high risk but low reward. Like you sort of have to get these, sort of the publishers working well and so forth. But maybe when we're talking about something like audience, that's the highest reward opportunity, right? You could actually increase your campaign by figuring those things out. Is that kind of the way to say it?
Yeah, that sounds right, John.
And I guess if we pull all these levers, we can improve all the metrics across the funnel, right? Like awareness and consideration and purchase intent and favorability.
So again, frequently this isn't actually going to be the case. So for many campaigns, different elements are going to be better at optimizing different KPIs. For example, there might be a creative that is doing a great job of driving consideration, but switching to that creative doesn't really move the needle on awareness. And similarly, there might be a publisher that's doing a great job of driving aided awareness, but isn't really outperforming other publishers in terms of consideration. Well, we actually found that in over half of all campaigns, the CAM element that you needed to optimize to increase awareness was different than the campaign element you needed to optimize for consideration.
Yeah, and this is timely because we just got a question in the chat that says when we're saying negative lift, are we talking about awareness? And no, what we're talking about, well, first of all, we don't believe that an advertising campaign will make people forget a brand. Because again, we're looking at causal impacts. We don't think that is actually possible. But when we say negative lift, we talk about things that are hurting the campaign or dragging down the average lift. Is that more or less the clarification we're making?
Yeah, that's definitely right. So we definitely looked at campaigns that did have sort of negative observed lift and aided awareness, which we usually think of as being a flat campaign, but also negative lift for down funnel metrics like consideration and purchase intent. And we did look at sort of which elements affect each of these KPIs. And while there are some differences, it really depends campaign to campaign, which elements are going to be best for which KPIs.
Yeah, got it. Right. So again, I think we can't just assume that when we optimize our campaign for brand, we're going to move people all the way from awareness through intending to purchase or love a product or a brand. So to kind of recap here, I think when we're talking about performance branding, as a marketer, what we're going to do as kind of the three pillars to figure out what we're looking at is we're going to lean into what might be dragging our campaign down, right? We're not going to be afraid of that. Secondly, we have to figure out what our key objectives are, right? And this is something that I think I see a lot. It's like I tell people you have to have a brand in order to get successful measurement. You have to have a brand. That seems silly, but a lot of people want to run campaigns to do other things. That's perfectly fine. But you have to have a brand you're trying to get people to know and to feel certain ways about. And then you have to have an objective for that brand, right? Because not all campaigns are created equal, right? An awareness campaign, in terms of what the creative is and what the tactics are, probably look a lot different than what, a consideration or a little bit lower brand funnel looks like, you know. And then you have to find out, use the data and the tools available to find out, which levers you can pull. So I think this is, would you consider this to be foundational to, what we're talking about here?
Yeah, definitely. You really do need to sort of know what your objectives are so that you can actually optimize them. But you also do need to know what things can you change in your campaign. So we like to say what levers can you pull. So once you know those, then you can start looking at these common and impactful elements and just search for the best opportunities to optimize your campaign.
Yeah. So I did notice that audience was one of the factors that you called out that could drive positive outcomes. And I think a lot of us are interested in that because we feel like who we're reaching is one thing we can control more than others. So did we dig into audiences at all?
Yeah, we did. So what we really wanted to dig into here is which audience factors were most correlated with brand outcomes. So what we're really doing here is taking advantage of the models we're using to do deconfounding to really understand what factors are most important. And so we did what's called a feature importance analysis, which produces a percentage value for each potential audience factor. So we get these feature importances by examining the models that are trained to understand the relationship between brand outcomes and demographic and behavioral traits of consumers. So for this, we're using a model called random forest, where we try to predict brand outcomes by iteratively splitting the data based on audience attributes. For example, we might divide the data into two groups. We have past users over here and non-past users over here. So we have people that have used your brand in the past and people that have not. So past users are going to be much more likely to consider the product than non-users. And so this split makes our prediction of consideration more accurate. And then we're going to keep dividing the respondents up using one audience attribute at a time until we've got a perfect or near perfect prediction of your brand outcome. So generally the factors you use to split the data are going to be chosen based on which factors do the best job of separating positive and negative respondents. And then we repeat this process for many random subsets of the data to reduce the variance of our predictions. So if we look over all these choices at how often the factor is selected in this process, it gives us a sense of how important that factor is. So we calculated these feature importance values for over 1,000 campaigns and then looked at the average feature importance for each factor across all of those campaigns.
Okay, so we looked at all the factors, and essentially we said we're trying to more or less pick a winner or pick the thing that is important the most often across all the campaigns we looked at. Is that more or less right?
Yeah.
Okay, so at a high level, what should we care about?
Yeah, so after this analysis, we found that past usage and competitor awareness combined had nearly 50% of feature importance, meaning they were used to determine more than 50% of the split data, which we actually found to be quite large.
So I think what we mean is when we look at something like this is, take these two things together, right? So I guess we're not saying, I think you could look at this and say, wow, past usage and competitor awareness, are you retargeting and conquesting? And I don't think we're saying that. I think what we're really saying is if you're a cat food brand, your cat food campaign is going to resonate better if you're reaching cat owners, right? People that are sort of familiar with the space and are more already kind of predisposed to think about, or remember these types of brands. Is that what we're saying here?
Yeah, definitely. I think the important thing to note is these, both of these factors have to do with past interactions with your brand and also competitors in your space.
Got it. And I think also what's important is going back to our point about not all your objectives and KPIs are created equal, right? So, Coca-Cola probably cares a lot about past usage for the main Coke brand, but probably also isn't going to leverage that to try to generate more awareness for Coke. Like everybody sort of already knows it, right? So I think that's the other way to use this finding. Okay, so what are some of the other factors? Oops.
So after our top two factors that relate to past interactions with the brands category, we really see a pretty steep drop off. But the biggest factors tended to be somewhat basic demographics, such as age, region, household income, and also some other factors related to interactions with the category, such as purchase frequency. And then if we go down another step, we start to see more niche factors, such as employment-related factors and behavioral factors.
Yeah, and I think if some of you are kind of struggling with how to read these percentages, another way to think about it is that we're kind of picking winners. So like they would add up to 100. So the largest percentage we saw was for the past interactions at 22%. And so these are some of the lowers, and then there's a long tail beyond this. Is that kind of the right way to think about it?
Yeah, I think that's definitely what you want to keep in mind. Sort of these percentages are just going to sum to 100%. We looked at more than 30 different factors. I think we combined one set into a group of others, but even with that, we had more than 30 different factors. So if these are summing to 100%, then you can think of sort of an average feature importance is going to be around 3%. So really these basic demographic factors are actually having an average feature importance. But these more niche factors really do have below average feature importances.
Yeah. They still seem really low though. What do you make of that?
I think part of what's going on here is that a lot of these data points are going to be correlated with each other. So age is going to be really correlated with household income. Household income is probably going to be correlated with education, which was also in the list. And so any of these factors that are correlated with other factors are kind of going to have to share importance. And so I think the real headline is sort of how important past users and past usage competitor awareness are. And it's really because they contain information that you can't quite get from just age or household income.
I see. So I guess if some of these factors are not as prominent, then generally, as a rule of thumb, we're saying, if you targeted tech enthusiasts, even if you had a technology brand, like it may not work. It might work for your brand. So because this is a broad set of campaigns that we measured. So I think what we're really saying here is that if there's a rule of thumb, it looks a lot like this. But if you do target on something that's we've shown to have a low factor, the most important thing is to not just assume it works, right? To monitor and adjust as you go, right? Maybe adjust targeting. Does that seem fair?
Yeah.
Okay. So we first talked about how to start acting like a performance brander. Then we discussed which attributes really move the needle. So then how would you describe like our rules of thumb here when building audience targeting or trying to maximize your brand impact?
I think what we're really saying here is that some factors are going to be more important on average than others. So past usage and competitor awareness is always going to be a big factor because consumers who have used your category or your brand in the past are always going to behave differently. I don't think that's really surprising. But for some of these other more standard attributes, you really need a specific reason to be targeting based on these. So this could mean you're really trying to push into a specific demographic that maybe you're under indexing on right now, or maybe you're using these other factors as proxies for attributes like past usage and competitor awareness that are harder to get clear signals on. But ultimately, you need to weight the cost and effort of reaching niche demographic audiences with the increased impact you expect to see for these audiences. So you really want to make sure that if you're paying a premium to reach some niche audience, you really need to be seeing that performance.
Yeah. I think it was really surprising to me that some of the attributes you sort of associate with branding, like age, were less of a factor. But at the same time, some of these are really intuitive, right? Like if you're a video game brand, you're going to want to reach gamers, right? The specific reason is if you've got retirement products, then age actually is one of your most important things. So I think I think there's sort of a surprising finding, and also some it sort of checks out with intuition after that. So we covered a few examples today, I think, but again, if we go back to the beginning, one of the key takeaways is that performance branding means taking action, right? So while hopefully this expert update was meant to kind of prompt some ideas, get the creative juices flowing, or I guess creative in the sense of media, is creative as media gets, and to understand what's going on and what you're really trying to do or cause to have happen with the advertising, and be laser focused on, pulling levers. And the way that we think about that is there are low risk levers. So there are media elements that you can control, like frequency capping, and creative rotation, things that really don't affect the budgets at all. But then there are other things like audience that we discussed that could actually change, what is your addressable market? How many people can you reach among those that are best performing? What are the budget and cost implications? And those are really the things to look at. But hopefully, what people were able to take away from this is that if you don't take action, that is an action in and of itself. If you keep your creative weighting at 50-50, that's a choice. And so using some of the diagnostics that you have available to just try things and try to course correct is probably the most important piece. Any final thoughts from you, Bo, on some of the major findings?
No, I think I just wanted to call out a lot of what we're talking about today is about what works on average. And you really need to sort of be monitoring your campaign if you want to know what's going to be most effective for your campaign.
Great. Well, thanks a lot, Bo. And thanks for everybody for joining. This concludes the expert update, and we'll see you at the next one.